Greetings, fanboys and fangirls. Jared here with another video review from Fanboys Forever. And today we'll be having a look at the brand new He-Man and the Masters of the Universe He-Man figure from the cartoon collection. Now, the interesting thing is, I guess you would still refer to this as Masters of the Universe Origins, maybe. This is an offshoot line from Origins that focuses on those classic Filmation looks. In terms of a business decision, this seems to be a brilliant move on Mattel's part because they've mostly covered all of the main characters and the most profitable characters that they have already in Origins. So a great way to just re-release all the characters that's the easiest to market and the most likely to sell is to simply do it in the Filmation style, and there you go, a whole new line. For as brilliant an idea as this is, though, in terms of marketing, we're here today to decide if it was a great idea in terms of the creative output of the company. And more particularly, I thought this could be the most vanilla review of all time, especially considering that a lot of people got a hold of this guy a lot earlier than I did. So I thought, wait a minute, let's do something a little more interesting. That's why rather than just being a review of this guy, we are going to be looking at the 5 main regular He-Man sculpts and comparing them to each other in the Origins body type line. So you might be wondering, well, what exactly do I classify as a regular He-Man body sculpt or a regular He-Man figure? Well, what I mean is He-Man in his power vest with no kind of special power-up or anything like that. Basically, He-Man has to be wearing the furry boots, the furry shorts, and be wearing the power vest and have the power sword. And there you go, that's kind of my criteria. By that reckoning, not counting some paint variations and things, there have been 5 key versions of He-Man in this line. If you're just looking for that vanilla, regular old Dutch boy haircut kind of He-Man that we all know and love. So let's go over what's been released so far. To begin, we have the original Origins release right over here. He featured more of a mini-comics inspired head sculpt, and that was back when the line was Walmart exclusive, which seems like forever ago now. Over here we have the 2000X version of He-Man, which was always something that surprised me that they even did within the line. More specifically, this version here is the one that comes in the TV box set, so I've always liked that one because it has back metal. Over here to the side, we have the reversioning that they did later on to turn the mini-comics inspired version more into the standard He-Man from the old original line with a new head. And then over here we do have another figure that was exclusive to that TV box set that was their previous version of Filmation He-Man without all the new sculpting that we see here, while retaining a lot of its own unique sculpting that may, well, never be utilized ever again. And of course our new figure today from the brand new cartoon collection. But before we get into this comparison and ranking, if you will, then I do ask that you please subscribe to the channel. I do fun videos like this all the time. You never know what form my reviews will take. I try to keep it interesting for all of my viewers, and I really do appreciate how we seem to be getting more and more subscribers and the channel seems to be growing. I also would like to ask that you please like the video if the content ends up matching your expectations, or dislike the video if it doesn't. Either way, it's all good. I'd love to discuss it with you down in the comments below, and of course at the end tell me your choice between which of these is your go-to default He-Man. Alright, with that out of the way, let's begin. So looking at the card here, of course we're not going to compare that with the other guys since those have long been thrown away. I think it's kind of cool that they have a little burst up there with the 80s adventures. You know, Mattel loves their bursts on every single thing. I do like that they call it He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, and that there's kind of a background painting of Castle Grayskull back there, kind of like you'd see in the old show. You can see He-Man himself right there looking good in the packaging. And I really like how they've utilized the Filmation font for the cartoon collection sticker, which is just a transparent backed sticker that they put on the front. Interesting, I guess legally they still can't exactly call it the Filmation collection or reference the word Filmation, even though I believe Mattel does outright. They made a deal, I believe, owns all of those designs now. Of course, the OGs will remember a time when that was a legal impossibility for Mattel. Alright, on the back you can see that we have some artwork that is homaging the classic episode Masks of Power, and it just refers to it as the 80s Masters Universe series. It includes the Sword of Ancients as a episode-specific accessory, which all these guys include some kind of cool episode-specific thing, which I think is a great idea. And you can see you can put them in battle poses, and of course the cross-sell. I really like this artwork on the back. It does a good job of kind of looking like the old cross-sell paintings. If you're looking for this guy, here is the UPC. Unfortunately, I've been quite disappointed with the availability of these guys. I really thought that they would be everywhere. I thought you'd be able to find them at Walmart and Target and all kinds of places. And you guys may have seen them a lot more than I have or something, but I certainly haven't. Hopefully this is an archaic part of this video later on. So let's go ahead and open them up. And you do get this mini comic for this series, The Mask of the Magi. And you can see some very cool Filmation inspired artwork. I particularly like the wink back there from that reused animation from Filmation, and a little cross-sell on the back. Have to read that later. And just so you can see, here is the card artwork without the figure on it. Shame you can't see the jaw bridge opening a little more clearly, because that's so cool that the figure is featured like right in it. And there he is, the legend himself, Filmation He-Man, out of the packaging. So let's definitely discuss what's going on here, because it's really, it was a bizarre sensation getting this guy out of the packaging. Because unless you've handled one of these so far, and I don't mean Masters of the Universe Origins, I mean the cartoon collection. Unless you've handled one of the cartoon collection figures, then it's hard to articulate exactly how the experience is incredibly different versus what you get with Origins. And I'll say that because the most obvious thing I've done with the posing, which is stand them straight up. Now, as silly as that may sound, it's true. If you try to take a regular Origins figure and you try to stand them straight up, they can't necessarily go beyond squatting their knees. I mean, they can sort of stand straight up, but, well, it's easier just to show you. This is as much standing up straight as he can do, but if you were to take him to the side, you can see that he's definitely squatting somewhat, but that's all you can do. That's as straight as the legs go. It's an unnaturally thin knee to accommodate the articulation and all of that, while still keeping him in kind of a permanently squat pose. However, if you turn this He-Man, he has much less of that going on. It's still a very thin knee, but it's much more straightened out. And this is probably a good time to mention that whether you realized it or not, all of the body sculpting is completely new in the cartoon collection. So even the arms are completely new. They don't have as much crazy definition as the regular Origin sculpt, I guess, to make it look more animated. The chest is kind of thinner up there to give less of the crazy, extreme, bulky proportion to make it a little more like the Filmation models. And the abs and all of that are completely different. The legs are especially different, like I said. They seem to be, have a lot more definition actually up here. So it's really interesting. The furry boots are completely different. I'm not sure about the hands. It is interesting that he has two holding hands, though, and no fisted hand or open hand, because, as a lot of you may realize, He-Man in the Filmation show didn't really use a shield that often. So I guess they didn't see the need to have him with the open hand. As shocking as it may be for the uninitiated to hear, longtime fans will know that in the modern era, the head sculpt that Mattel has struggled with the very most is He-Man himself. And I think it's easy to throw shade at Mattel and kind of badmouth about how they've kind of missed He-Man's head a few times in both Masterverse and a couple of times in Origins. But I would remind you not to be so quick to judge. I mean, look at other companies like, say, McFarlane or Marvel Legends, and anytime that they have to do the likeness for one of these kind of perfect-faced, dare not say generic, but certainly generically good-looking characters, like, say, Superman or someone like that, there's always a little bit of struggle to get that right. Certainly you can see that even when Hollywood actors that are kind of stereotypically good-looking or have expected facial features, it's really hard to nail that likeness of those characters. So I definitely think there's a reason why Mattel can sometimes struggle on this, because, well, it's hard. He-Man is definitely no exception, because he is definitely cut from that same kind of cloth. So no wonder there's been a lot of struggle. But here, Mattel is contending with two different things. They're trying to make it a regular He-Man head sculpt, that will work just as standard He-Man, which can be a struggle, like we said, while at the same time also being filmation accurate, which is a whole thing. We know that He-Man has a very specific look in that show, and to, I think, most people in the world, that is He-Man to them. Whereas you and me, it may be the, the toy head or whatever. I would say that the filmation look is probably the most iconic. And in that regard, I would say that I think they have mostly done it here. I think they've done a very good job. I would say that this is almost right on exactly what they needed to do. I mean, just looking at it, I think that the big, black pupils in the eyes, the eyebrows, the way the hair is situated on the head, the shape of the chin, the lip shape, I think all of that is just right on. There's really very little to complain about here. I think maybe one of the only little things I would say is it almost looks like the head sets a little too snugly to the chest. He might have needed a little more of a neck. The only other thing is maybe from some angles, maybe the nose is a little thin or so in its construction or its shaping, but it looks a little better to the side. It's just when you do it towards the front like this, and it looks a little stranger that way. But really, overall, I think it works. I really don't want to say too much negative here because I think they've done a really, really good job. Usually what I would have compared it to in the past, probably would have thought about like the Super 7 Retro Collection or whatever they called it, where they did, the real 5 points of articulation, old style Masters figures that had the filmation likenesses. And I don't have that, but as you can see right here, even this is no slouch compared to what Super 7 did. And I always kind of considered that more the high water mark for a company trying to get those likenesses right. So I would say overall, yeah, really good, very solid head sculpt, just about there for that filmation look. So I think it's a very good attempt. As for any other details on the figure as we make our way down, one thing is sure, that this is just a completely brand new body sculpt. I do think that the overall smoother look goes a long way in helping to translate to the animation models. Looking at it from the back, we have the really nice scabbard that's done in the kind of simplified style. Now this one is pretty easily removable too. It just pegs into the back, and you can see, even though I dropped mine, that it just comes right out. So if you don't want it back there and you just want them to have a cleaner look, you can do that, but I don't necessarily know why you would do it like that. I just keep it on. Of course, the power sword itself looks really nice and has kind of a slightly metallic sheen to it, but it's not overdone. Now, articulation is important with this guy because, well, it's a new body and it moves differently than what we've seen so far. You can definitely get some really great range out of the arms and hit those 90-degree marks. The head can go up and down and has about the normal kind of range of motion, but I feel like that you can kind of crook the head a little bit more than you usually could with these figures before. You can, of course, bring the arms all the way around. That's not going to be an issue. Of course, there's a swivel here at the elbow, and you can get about 90 degrees there, so I feel like that's better than it was before. There's a hinge and a rotation at the hands. The waist swivel, of course. You can get pretty good splits right here, about as much as you would want. And I feel like the kicking action is greatly improved over the others that we'd seen before. And I think it's partially because that they've given more clearance to this area right here, right around the pelvis of the figure. So I think that helps quite a bit. Of course, with the knee, we've already talked about how it has some extended range where you can straighten it out more. Down here at the boot, there's a cut. There is a hinge here at the ankle, and of course, ankle rocker pivot, so that you can hit even those really, really wide stances. And even though I desperately want to call it the Sword of Omens, this is the Sword of Ancients. And I really like the sculpting on this. It's pretty accurate to the source. And you can see that you can put it right in his hand. So if you want to, you could even have him brandishing both at the same time. For me, there's really only one kind of question mark for this guy about why they did it the way they did it. And I think that that's the power vest itself. It is true that in filmation, it is kind of more of a, I guess, a bluish hue of gray. But I feel like they might have went a little far in that direction by adding kind of the glittery bits to make it look a little more metallic. And the thing is, it's coming across better on camera than it does in person. But if you get a little closer, you can kind of see what I'm talking about, that kind of glittery effect. It almost makes this seem like a special version or one that would be in a 2-pack or something and not the standard release. But that's where that He-Man TV box set version comes in. I believe this is the same exact piece, so we should be able to switch these out. And just as I suspected, he looks quite a bit better with the old vest on. It really makes me wonder why they didn't just do the same thing over again. It's almost like they were wanting to keep a measure of exclusivity to that TV box set version. If I were them, I certainly wouldn't have worried about that and just went with this more basic tone, because I do think it looks quite a bit better like this. And just so you can see from the back, it looks a lot better as well. And I ended up coming up with something pretty interesting. It's kind of an amalgamation of things. I could go a little bit further with it if I wanted to, and give He-Man, you know, some different arms and maybe give him his regular furry shorts and things like that. But I think that this is just, you know, one example of something you could do by switching it out with that classic head and using the more classic colored power vest. I think you can get something pretty nice. It might be especially interesting to take the regular toy vest and put it on the new body. I don't know, there's lots of possibilities. I do think the head might look a little strange on this body, with, like I said earlier, the big problem being he doesn't have much of a neck here. I still think it looks really cool though, so that's another possibility. I don't necessarily want to do a ranking video because, you know, I do those and they're their own separate things here on the channel. Let's do a versus video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have each He-Man square off against this new Filmation version. We're going to point out what's good, what's bad, what's better, what's worse. Round 1, we have him going against the original Walmart exclusive Masters of the Universe Origins He-Man. I think there's definitely a lot to discuss here, because this He-Man would of course lay the foundation for everything that the Origins line would be. I think right off the bat, I'll go ahead and talk about some of my own personal biases with these figures. For me personally, I always really like it when He-Man has the red squares on the vest. I always hate to see that missing, and it's just an extra little detail that I think makes him look a little bit cooler. So that hurts that he doesn't have it, but he does. But we're going to see that difference with all of them. I think the real thing that we'll talk about is pretty much the head sculpt. Now, I've already let it be known in some of my ranking videos about my initial feelings on that head sculpt. I think it's a very serviceable head sculpt when you look at it compared to some of like the Bruce Timm artwork and different things, and some of the early artwork in the mini comics. So I definitely think it's very effective, but at the same time, there's something that isn't quite registering, for me anyway, with this head sculpt. He looks appropriately angry, and I think it's well done. I really like the hair sculpt on that. I think that's really good and doesn't really get enough play and enough credit. There's something a little off about the facial expression, almost as if they've taken the original toy head and they've tried to just make it slightly different, but not different enough. And for that reason, I could never really see him as being like the main He-Man in the line for me, especially since at this point in the line they didn't have some things figured out. You can see his legs are a little more tan than his chest, and you can also see that the actual power vest itself has some pretty rough production stuff going on. Some of the paint's not aligned, and he has that pretty rough half power sword back there that you can tell on his back, but he does include a shield, which is more than I can say for the Filmation He-Man. Round 1 goes to Filmation He-Man. It's the 2000X version of He-Man, and this chrome paint job, of course, is from the TV box set. There's a lot to love about their take on He-Man here. For one, since this is the TV box set, not only does he come with a much more plussed up and painted techno power sword, but he also includes the axe and the shield, all in those great kind of extra paint hits. But that's not going to be the main thing that influences me with this. It's more about the actual sculpt itself, which I am thankful they did paint the red blocks on this version. They didn't do that for the standard retail release. I think the head sculpt is really good here because they've done a great job combining the elements of the original He-Man head sculpt with some of the design aesthetic of that 2000X He-Man series. And so overall, I think he works as a great He-Man, and certainly an awesome standard He-Man. I think the the thing where he misses the boat a little bit is kind of the classic recognition of He-Man. I think the biggest issue probably is, and it's not really an issue, but it's more of an aesthetic thing with him being instantly recognizable as standard He-Man, is they did something a little more modern with the hair, right? It's less Dutch boy and more kind of savage mullet, or kind of grown out a little bit more. It's also a little strange to see eyes that look like regular He-Man, but you know, everything else looks like the 2000X cartoon, the Mike Young production show. But overall, it's a fantastic figure. But if I'm going with what would be a standard He-Man, once again, I'm going to give it to Filmation. Now, this is by far our most interesting comparison yet, and that would be with our pre-release Filmation He-Man. Of course, this was the figure that came in the He-Man TV box set, and kind of in my mind was their pre-release version where they were experimenting with different things to see what would work. And certainly I do think there was a lot working for them. For one thing, we can see that they did a great job with the new piece right there that they were using for the belt and the bracelets, even if mine ends up having some slop on it right there for whatever reason, that little green bit. And especially the vest piece, because I'm pretty sure that, you know, the vest piece we have over here is pretty much the exact same thing. So I think all those things were working out very well. I think that the one thing that they didn't land was the head sculpt. And I really do think the head sculpt looks fine. I really do. I don't think it's any kind of disaster. I think you could look at it and easily know that it's supposed to be classic He-Man, and it works very well. As a matter of fact, it kind of looks like this guy, but with a different facial expression, or drawn by a different animator or something, or a different frame. But there are some things that didn't come across. One of them was the shaping of the lips and the nose and some of the cheeks. Some of the proportions became off very quickly with this guy, and it ends up kind of looking like he's got his lips pooched out, and maybe he's chewing something, maybe a little bit. I mean, it's just being, you know, very picky. So I can still comfortably say that this guy, though, is better, even if he has the better vest, the better power vest on. So with all the new pieces and everything, and how they revisited that head sculpt and were sure to take in all of the feedback, I think that it ended up being much better for their new and revised version in practically every way. And of course, we have him going up against the classic looking re-release of Standard He-Man. Of course, this is incredibly similar to that original kind of mini comics based head version, except this time they've replaced it with a more classic head, and they've done a few different things elsewhere on the figure, like giving him a power sword that was solid, and changing the shield up a little bit, so he does indeed include that classic shield with the power sword. So this is a really tough one, because I think that this one is going to depend on what your perception of classic He-Man is. Aside from the colors being a little bright for my taste over here, this is a fairly good replica of that original 80s toy, with modern articulation, of course. But then you have to ask yourself, if you were a devotee of the original Filmation show, is this more your wheelhouse right here? So I think that only you can answer that one for yourself. But for me, because my perception of He-Man has less to do with the cartoon, because I didn't grow up during the time that it aired, desperately wanted to see it when I was little, but no one was playing it here in the United States. I kept hoping that Cartoon Network would eventually show it. I remember when Cartoon Network first came out, I thought, well, this is my ticket right here. Nope, never happened. So Filmation doesn't necessarily color what I think of when I think of just classic He-Man. So for the purposes of my displays, I think that this still remains my classic He-Man. But I do think this is probably a better figure. Everything from the new body parts that they put in, the extended articulation. I just think that overall, when it comes to how the figure looks, I just think it cuts kind of a better profile as He-Man. I do think it is the better of the two, but like I said, it's less about which one is better and more about which one fits your perception of classic He-Man. And for me, That's the toy version. Even if it's not exact to that toy, I would still like to see a version come out that would maybe do some things to the colors to make it almost an exact replica, and maybe use some of these body parts to give you some more posing options. And here's an interesting comparison, and one I almost forgot to do, kind of being lost in the tunnel vision of Origins. But this is indeed my old original Club Filmation, or whatever you want to call it, Filmation He-Man that Mattel did for Classics. Of course, this is the first version and not the one they would do later on from Super 7, but the one actually from Mattel proper. And I actually did one of my first MOTU videos reviewing this guy way back in the day when he first came out, so longtime viewers of the channel will still recognize him perhaps. This is a really interesting comparison. There's certainly some things that are better, I think, in each direction. I think they got the Filmation hair color more correct here, and definitely the vest color more correct. But I definitely think that he's too tan, and it amazes me just how tan he is after getting him out after all these years. They really overdid it with that on the original release. And this guy is a little closer, I think, to more of the Filmation character model. Although that character model was fairly tan. Don't think it was quite to that level. But, you know, these are completely different formats. However, this also does accentuate the need for him to have a neck, and he doesn't hardly have one. And you can see here that that goes a long way in making him look a little more natural, even if this is too dark. And here's a look at what would have happened if Filmation had done New Adventures of He-Man rather than Jetlag Studios. So, maybe. Well guys, that pretty much wraps it up for my thoughts on the He-Man and the Masters of the Universe cartoon collection He-Man. This is a great figure, and it feels markedly better to pose around and just kind of mess with than a standard Origins figure does. And that's saying something, because I've handled a whole lot of those Origins figures. I really do think that this is a strong start for the line, and I think that pretty much anybody that gets a hold of this guy is going to be happy with him. He definitely puts you in the mind of that Filmation model sheet, while still bringing a whole lot of uniqueness that a lot of the other figures don't have. If you're looking for your key He-Man for your collection or your display, it very well may be this guy right here. I certainly would think that he would be a fine choice. I think the only issue might be the power vest would have probably looked better had they just done the flat gray with maybe slightly bluer hue without the kind of glitter effect. Alright guys, well, if you've enjoyed this content, be sure to hit the like button, because it really does help the channel out, and it's probably one of the very best things you can do to help us grow. Of course, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and comment down below letting me know which one of the 5 main He-Man sculpts from this line that you think is the very best for being the standard He-Man release. As always, God bless you and yours, and I'll see you on Fanboys Forever. Fanboy out.